With Riot's recent focus on items for the preseason, it is interesting to see not only how well these new items fit Runeterra visually, but also that each item has a bit of a story behind it. In the past, items with actual lore were rare. In fact, there is only one item with lore that pretty much everyone knows about. Everyone knows that the Blade of the Ruined King belongs to the one
true king,
who is Ezreal apparently. But with the new wave of item updates, the stories get a lot more interesting. Suddenly, Riot is using clever names and visual cues to reference souls from the Shadow Isles, true ice armor of the Iceborn, the Ionian demons called Azakana, or maybe even Vladimir's Crimson Circle. This item is especially cool because it gives you lifesteal for some added immersion. But among all of these new and old items, there were always the starting items mentioning the mysterious Doran. Interestingly, Doran's original lore came from the old Journals of Justice. There it was mentioned that he was a legendary smith who could create some of the most powerful and efficient items in the world. But then a donkey kicked him in the head, and he forgot how to craft complex items. The only things he could make after that were extremely powerful items that were also very simple, which also made them efficient. That's why the starting items are so powerful compared to their gold cost. At least that was the original story. Now after this there was a 7-year gap before we got to Ornn, who also has a quote mentioning Doran.
I taught Doran everything he knows.
This confirmed that Doran and Ornn have met at some point in their lives. But after that, Yi got his lore update. And in his story it was mentioned that not only did Doran craft the Wuju battle staff, which Yi later passed on to Wukong, but he also created the 7 lenses of insight, which is the helmet that Master Yi wears now. After that story we got another year of silence, which brings us to the most recent story, which tells a tale of young Yi and Master Doran. So without further ado, let's have a look at what Master Doran was truly like. A quick note, instead of using another dark silhouette of a person to represent young Yi in this story, I decided to use Eternal Yi because that's the only version of Yi we have without the helm. So to clear things out, this is not what young Yi looked like, but I'll use it anyway. If you are wondering what young Yi actually looked like, this is how the story pictured him. But now, let's get on it. The story begins with young Yi meeting Master Doran on top of a hill. At this time, Doran was already really old. And so, once he reached the top, not only was he completely out of breath, but he also apologized for being late. Like, half a day late. Unfortunately, Doran's age was also getting to his head. And so, when Yi started reciting the poems of Buxi, who was the greatest poet in Ionian history, Doran had no idea what he was saying or who he was talking about. And so, instead of reciting, Yi just quickly jumped onto the matter at hand. His master sent him here to train with Doran, so he was ready to follow Master Doran's instructions. After hearing this, Doran chuckled. If they called what they were about to do training, it made sense why Yi was here so early. This made Yi feel a bit uneasy, since he still wasn't sure what this strange weaponsmith could teach him about the secret art of Wuju. And to set up some background, this is where the story gave us some basic lore for Doran. The first time Yi had met Master Doran was at his parents' workshop. Everyone greatly respected him, though he was once an outsider to the village. Unfortunately, the story doesn't mention where Doran came from, but since Ornn supposedly met him, it wouldn't be entirely out of question to think that Doran was originally a Freljordian. Although it is more likely that Doran just briefly traveled there, and he is still originally Ionian. Anyway, when he arrived at the Wuju village, the local smiths and masters embraced him, for his skill with hammer and anvil was legendary. But unlike all the other craftsmen at the village, Doran was messy, often distracted, and straight up strange. And though Yi and his parents respected the great poets, since he had no idea who Buxi was, Doran apparently did not. Yi forced himself to smile as he asked Doran when would they begin. Doran replied that he was old enough to have all the time in the world, and he wondered why Yi was so nervous. He's been training swordsmanship for only 6 months. It was a bit early to be impatient. But Yi corrected Doran that in fact, he's been training for 4 seasons now. And the reason why he was nervous was because some thought he was unfit to continue training in Wuju style. This surprised Doran, who suddenly remembered that Yi was in fact 14 years old now. And he even pinched Yi's biceps, telling him no wonder he's so strong. And Doran guessed Yi was probably practicing with the sword every sunrise. What Doran didn't know, however, was that Yi was doing exactly that. No matter what task or practice training his masters gave him, he always followed instructions, and he was working far harder than his fellow students. He could perform every stance and move in Wuju style, enter a meditative state with incredible speed and form, and recite most poems, songs, and other Wuju texts. Yet, despite all of his achievements, he had an embarrassing obstacle on his journey. Forcing himself to smile, Yi replied to Doran by saying that, yes, he does practice every sunrise about 4,000 times. That's when Doran took off the massive bamboo basket he had on his back, and he gave it to Yi. To quote him, it was a fitting load for a strong young man. Then Doran started marching south. This confused Yi because south of the Wuju village was nothing but uninhabited woods. Unless Doran wanted to hunt some boars, there wasn't much training they could do there. But Yi promised his master he would obey this old man. And so he slung the bamboo basket over his shoulders and followed. As they walked, they got onto a path he had never seen before. In fact, Yi didn't even know it existed. After some more time of traveling, with no training in sight, Yi asked Doran what exactly was in the basket he was carrying. Doran replied, swords. All swords. Doran was known for crafting only a handful of blades each season, so Yi wanted to know if all of these were made by him. Doran explained that only 3 of them were, but the rest was, for the lack of a better word, entrusted to him by his fellow craftsmen. In fact, Doran revealed that one of the blades was meant for Yi. This caught Yi off guard. He has never wielded a sharpened blade, because only those who fully understand the Wuju philosophy of bloodless combat were allowed to use lethal weapons. Usually, one would have to study for at least 10 years to receive a blade crafted by Master Doran. And yet, Yi got excited because he was about to get one a lot sooner. This excitement then quickly faded away, and even Doran noticed the change in mood. The two then walked a bit in silence, before Doran told Yi that he had heard he had some trouble connecting with the spirit realm. That was the obstacle that could prevent Yi from becoming a Wuju master. But Yi explained that he could connect with the spirit realm, he just couldn't draw power from it and enhance his blade. A while later, Yi asked Doran if he had ever walked this hidden road before, and Doran told him that he walks this path once every 4 seasons. And he added that Yi's master, Master Hurong, accompanied him here 2 or 3 times. This made Yi think that perhaps the training was being Doran's bodyguard. So he sneakily asked Doran if he had faced any dangers on this road before. Doran replied that although he had never faced a danger here, it didn't mean Yi couldn't. And just as he said that, a raptor screeched in the distance, and Yi's hand immediately went to his unsharpened blade, scanning the trees around them. Doran just rolled his eyes and gestured forward. When mountains popped up in the distance, Doran told Yi that's where they were going. Since Yi came from Barrel, surely he wasn't afraid of some hills. And as Yi looked up at the dazzling sun above the clouds, he had to admit it was a good day for a hike. Sometime later, they finally arrived at the mountains. Now they were well outside the Wuju territory, and beyond the distance which elders should travel. Yet, Doran showed no signs of slowing down. Eventually, their path stopped before a cliff. Before Yi could even say anything, Doran was already grabbing at the rocks, climbing up. He reached the top with little effort, turning back to Yi with an expression that said, "What are you waiting for?" Once Yi also reached the summit, with the heavy load still on his back, Doran told him to rest. They still had some time. And so the two sat down beside a stone tablet that had a single word inscribed on it: Mistfall. Then Doran started munching on some rice cakes, but Yi was impatient, and so he looked around. Besides the stone tablet, Yi noticed some ruins nearby that were overtaken by vines. Only the walls and the columns stood, but Yi was still able to tell it was entirely different architecture from the Wuju village. Doran explained that once these ruins housed a shrine. People worshipped a god there who fell from grace long before any of them were born. These days, nobody knew the god's name or where its followers went. Yi then recited another poem. Flowers wilt as falls grow old, even morning stars must return to night. Then he asked if they were the ones who called this place Mistfall. Doran answered that later generations carved that name here, and it was called that way because right next to this hill was a valley that reminded Yi of a lake, but instead of water, it was filled with a mist. In fact, Doran revealed that's where they were going. Being confused even more than before, Yi asked Doran just what kind of training were they doing. All Doran said back was that the journey would be rough, so perhaps he should finally take resting a bit more seriously. At this point, Yi was frustrated, because it was obvious Doran wasn't going to say anything else. On top of that, he didn't feel like resting right now. Instead, he decided to practice meditation, and so he sat down, closed his eyes and breathed deeply. It didn't take him long, and in the corner of his conscious mind, he found a blinding light, a spirit. This wasn't unusual for Yi. He had met many spirits in his meditations before, but this one was somehow different. In his mind, Yi tried to grab the spirit and feel its pulse. Instead, to his surprise, he merged with the entity, disappearing in the blinding light. The story then cuts into what Yi witnessed. The next time he opened his eyes, he was sitting beneath a giant silverwood tree, the one that was at the entrance to Wuju. As Yi walked into the village, he saw familiar figures, his parents, fellow disciples, even the neighbors and their pets. They all seemed to be engrossed in their own world, ignoring Yi, which made Yi believe this had to be some kind of a vision. Eventually, he found Master Doran in the village. The elder weaponsmith glanced at Yi before turning back to his work. But to Yi's surprise, instead of a furnace and an anvil, Doran was tending a small flower pot. He waved his hands and the small seedling stretched and curled in response. Then they grew at an incredible rate, and they swiftly turned into a small juniper tree. Doran seemed disappointed in his work, and so he waved his hands again, until the tree turned into a weeping willow. Awed by what was happening, Yi spun around, and he noticed that most of the Wuju village was covered in green vegetation, with the houses carved from stone to resemble humans. Later, a clarion sounded from the village center, and suddenly all villagers stopped what they were doing, and they walked toward the mountainside at the end of the town. A waterfall ran down the mountain, hiding a cave behind it. Doran was the first of the villagers to arrive. He waved his hands and the waterfall parted, allowing him to pass through relatively dry. Other villagers followed him, but when Yi waved his hands, the water did not part. He reassured himself that it is just a vision, and that it doesn't matter if he gets wet. And so he stepped through the waterfall, and found himself in a massive chamber filled with thousands of candles. In one corner of this place, there were people talking in language Yi couldn't understand. In another corner, there were the Wuju masters, including Yi's master, Hurong. Master Hurong gestured at a wall, and suddenly, it shifted like a living painting that eventually formed some kind of a map. Then, as the masters concluded their discussion, Master Hurong snapped his fingers, tearing the entire wall down and revealing the sky. After that, he jumped in the air, turned into a barrel jay, which was a native Ionian bird, and disappeared in the clouds above. The other elders followed him, all shaping into birds and emptying the chamber. Only Yi and Doran stayed behind. Knowing Yi couldn't communicate with Doran, he just nodded and turned to leave. But he was surprised to hear Doran call out to him in a language he understood. There, Doran asked him if he walks the path of Wuju. Yi froze and he just stared back at the weaponsmith, whose eyes had crimson irises, shining with eerie light, seemingly devoid of life. Doran continued that he had met Wuju practitioners before. They take great pains to ripping out what little power they could from the spirit realm, only to put it into a weapon. Yet, this poor mimicry was still enough to allow him to enter the domain of the strong. At this point, Yi was confused, and he asked, mimicry of whom? Doran ignored the question, and instead he pointed at the revealed sky, telling Yi to follow them. Yi replied that he couldn't fly, but Doran assured him he could. He just didn't know how to do it yet. Moments later, the walls of the cave moved together, and the opening above closed, sealing Yi inside. It seemed like the crimson-eyed Doran wanted Yi to fly, but Yi knew that wasn't necessary. Visions worked like dreams, and so, no matter how bizarre they were, he could always wake up from them. And so, with another quick meditation, Yi opened his eyes back in the physical world. Normally, when he wakes up from a vision, Yi would pinch his ear to see if he's back in reality. But this vision was so vivid, he had to ask Doran how long has he been meditating. When Doran looked back at him with his brown eyes, he told him they literally just sat down. The story then cuts to their journey into the valley. Just as Doran said, the path into the Sea of Mist was dangerous, with the stone steps leading down being covered in slippery green moss. As they got deeper into the mists, despite it being a hot day, Yi could feel it got significantly colder. He noticed that spirits lingered in the mist, and so he suggested to wait and return when the spirits were gone. But Doran assured him that the spirits would never leave. They lived in this place longer than people lived in Ionia. He also told Yi not to worry, they wouldn't be here for long. They just had to find a sword here. Yi couldn't believe that's what they were here for. But Doran added that they were looking for a blade from the Placidium specifically. He left it here as a marker the last time he was here. At first he looked around, but it was hard to see anything beyond 2 feet ahead of him. So then he just pretended he was searching for the blade. Suddenly he felt his body getting lighter and lighter. And when he called out to Master Doran that something wasn't right, instead of turning around, Doran sped up and vanished into the mist. The same mist then lifted Yi into the air, making him float, as if he was in another vision. He tried to stretch his arms to catch balance, but a pair of magnificent jade wings spread out from him instead. He became a bird. As he was soaring through the sky, a long coastline appeared in front of him. The land felt like home, but at the edge of the beach was a dark grey structure, the size of a mountain, that didn't belong in Ionia. It somewhat resembled a monument. It was 3 monstrous towers sharing a single base, far too large for a mortal construction. As Yi flew closer, other vibrant birds flew out of the clouds towards it. Instinctively, Yi joined them, as he followed a bright red bird. This bird then dashed between the towers before landing at its base. There the bird turned into its human form, the crimson-eyed Master Doran. Yi landed right next to him, also shifting into a human. At first, the crimson-eyed Doran was happy to see that Yi could fly now. But then he explained he wasn't in fact Doran. He just borrowed his form. This spirit then continued by explaining where they were now. It said, "You call this place Barl. We call this place home." But then the spirit pointed at a small foreign army that was patrolling the beach. And it added that these people call this place the Other Shore. Yi was confused once again, and he asked the spirit who were they, and who were we. But when he looked at the spirit, it was gone, with only a few red and white feathers left in its place. Yi wanted to leave this vision, just like he had the last one, but his meditation was interrupted by the loudest rhythmic sound he had ever heard. Following this sound, Yi walked past soldiers wearing metal helmets with bare chests, but armed with polearms. But just like in the previous vision, they ignored him. After climbing up the ramparts of this place, he saw an open square where the sound was deafening. The square was filled with soldiers of all kinds. Some wore spiked steel armor, some wore thick animal hides, but some only wore cloth robes. Yet they were all united in one purpose, as they all drummed their chests. Suddenly, the crimson-eyed Doran appeared behind Yi again, asking him what does he see. At first, Yi asked again, who were they, and why was the spirit showing him this? But in response, the spirit only wanted Yi to tell him the first word that comes to mind. After a moment, Yi said, strength. The spirit wanted to know where exactly does he see strength here. Yi replied that each warrior possessed the ferocity of a tiger and the strength of a great bear. They had shining armor, and their call roared across the beaches. After listening to what Yi said, the spirit suddenly understood why Yi was brought here. It then explained that the direction of his gaze was mistaken. The harder he would train, the further from his goal he would get. Then the spirit pushed Yi off the ramparts, with the impact from the fall waking Yi back to reality. Now he was back in the middle of the swirling mists, still carrying the basket. After a while, Doran reappeared from the mists, with the Placidium blade in his hands. At this point, he wasn't sure how to describe what just happened to him, so instead he just pointed out that they should get out of the mist. It was dangerous. But Doran told him it's fine. Every 4 seasons there was one night when the mist would disappear, and that night was today. Just as he said that, he noticed the air was losing its chill. To make sure he remained silent for the occasion, Doran put a finger on his lips. Then, just as the sun touched the zenith of a faraway mountain, the entire valley was laid bare, and Yi couldn't believe what he was seeing. All Doran said then was that perhaps the mist disappeared because the spirits here were commemorating that one momentous sunset, countless summers ago. In all of his 15 years, the most thrilling combat Yi had ever seen was a hunter fighting a boar. The hunter lost a finger, while the boar lost its head. As far as Yi knew, Ionia had always been a pure and peaceful place. Yet, what lay before him now proved him wrong. Countless blades were stuck in the ground. It was an endless ocean of weapons stretching to the distant mountains. At the center of the valley were 10 gigantic claymores. Their full size was hard to determine, as they were half buried in the ground. As Doran patted young Yi on the shoulder, we got one of the greatest reveals regarding the mysterious Ionian Titans. Doran explained that this was the site of an ancient battle. The combatants left their weapons here. The spirits protect each and every one, helping them resist the corrosion of time. As the eons went by, this became a sacred land. Over time, those who vowed never again to participate in the violence and bloodshed of war started coming here to leave their blades as well. This place was incredibly ancient. That's why Yi never heard about it. It was older than even Yi's oldest ancestors. These days there was hardly anyone who remembered this tradition, and those who did decided not to disturb the spirits. So then, the reason why Master Doran brought Yi here was because it used to be rumored that Mistfall spirits blessed weapons with power in combat. But when Doran found this place, he discovered the truth was the opposite. The ancient battle destroyed the balance of this place. So the spirits of this valley hate violence now. While they do bless weapons, their blessings lose their effect the moment the blades are used for bloodshed. Most swordsmiths stopped coming here after they realized this, with Doran being the only one who was able to get blessings that last. Doran then asked Yi if he figured out why Doran was able to do that. Yi nodded, saying that it was because he crafted swords only for the Wuju bladesmen, and they avoid bloodshed and killing. Doran was glad Yi understood. In fact, that was the reason why he remained in Wuju. All his life he created the best blades in the world, but not for battle, and only the Wuju saw his weapons the same way. Then Doran told Yi to put down the basket. They were going to plant down the swords, which suddenly explains why at the beginning of the story, Doran said that the basket was full of swords which people entrusted to him. He would plant these swords here, so they could get blessed by the Mistfall spirits. This included the sword made for Yi. And on his way back, he would retrieve the swords he left behind last time. As the two walked closer to the center of this place, it became obvious all sorts of beings left their weapons here. Some swords were too big for Yi to handle, and others were way too small. Eventually, the two found what Doran called his garden. It was marked by a single-edged human-sized blade, with a magnificent crossguard. It looked new, as if it was forged yesterday. Upon closer inspection, Yi noticed there was a paper amulet on a red string dangling from the hilt. In fact, quite a few swords in the ground had paper amulets as well. Amulets were usually used for prayers and blessings, but this was the first time Yi saw them on weapons. Like a farmer harvesting his crops, Doran began pulling the swords out, leaving the amulets on the ground, marking the places where they were. Yi wanted to help, and so he grabbed another nearby sword, only for Doran to shout at him that he was pulling out the sword of another smith. It wasn't Doran's, and it has been here for quite some time, so they would leave it here. As Yi released his grip on the blade, he accidentally unraveled the red string, letting the amulet fall. When he picked up the paper and read the Ionian words written on it, he realized it was a poem. Deafening thunder in spring, torrential rains in summer, easterly gales in autumn, Flying Snow in Winter. Doran explained it was a poem the swordsmith wrote to honor the spirits. In fact, while all the swords people gave him already had their poems ready, Doran still had to write 3 of his own poems for the swords he crafted. Just the thought of Master Doran writing a poem surprised Yi. Perhaps it meant Doran was studying poetry, but he was just teasing Yi when he told him he had no idea who Buxi was. After a while, Yi bent over to read the poem Doran wrote. No wars today, just a sip of wine to wash down duck eggs. Tastes yummy. After reading this, Yi couldn't contain his outrage. Doran just stroked his beard with pride, saying, "Do you like it?" He then calmed Yi down by saying that the rhyme and rhythm of a poem is just a decoration. What truly mattered were the feelings. And there was no denying this was how Doran felt about war. Just to make sure this field wasn't filled with words of random nonsense, Yi approached a strange twisted ceremonial blade. That one said, "Indefatigable horrors and demons, alongside inexhaustible evils and villains." Doran revealed that blade was made by Laka. She was famous at the Placidium, and her blades cost fortune. Next to it was another ceremonial blade. That one was used as a cane, and it somehow smelled like mint. That one said, "Blind faith ruins minds, blind loyalty ruins lives. When the butcher's knife strikes the ground, all are wounded, and the self is destroyed." Doran interrupted him by saying that this one was made by Moria. He was known for using the best materials for his clients, which were mostly priests and monks. With every crafted blade, he only got poorer and poorer. Doran then recognized a nearby greatsword with a tiny blue amulet, and he immediately shouted at Yi to check it out. It would be a good one. Unfortunately, the text was written in a foreign language which Yi couldn't read. Only the signature, which read, Lear. Doran explained that Lear was an absolute genius. He lived on the Southern Isles, and he had even been to Zone. Of course, Yi wondered where Zone even was, but Doran quickly said, "Don't ask." After reading a lot of the amulets around, Yi told Doran that the others at least resemble poetry. Doran, on the other hand, was careless. Yi continued that he should try to at least follow traditions. This was the basic way to respect spirits. Doran just smiled back, because that was the exact thing that Yi's master told him years ago. Yi added that's probably because they were both Wuju swordsmen. Jokingly, Doran questioned what he meant when he said both of them being Wuju swordsmen. But at this point, Yi had enough, and he was frustrated at what Doran was doing. He was disturbing the local spirits for his selfish hope of creating better swords. He was writing truly awful poetry. And worst of all, they were supposed to be training while Doran obviously had no understanding of Wuju at all. Doran argued back that there was no reason why he would have to understand Wuju. Besides, it was Yi who was supposed to be training. This made Yi snap in anger. So far, Doran had only made him climb mountains, rest and search for swords. There was still no real training in sight. After a moment of silence, Doran finally set his brush on the ground and replied that Yi's master told him that the most vital knowledge cannot be learned through words. And it was at this very place, years ago, that the master found the answer himself. Suddenly, he realized Doran was referring to the 7 fundamental doctrines of Wuju. The stunted flower blooms best in rain. Then Doran continued by saying that he had no idea how Wuju bladesmen train. That's why he mentioned there was no reason for him to know. He just wanted to ask Yi how much he understood so far, or if he learned nothing at all. Embarrassed, Yi apologized, and he asked Doran if he at least remembered how did Master Hurong find his answer. Unfortunately, Doran didn't ask him back then, but he remembered that Hurong left behind a poem. Then Yi approached Hurong's old greatsword. He noticed there was no poem attached to it, so he took a step back to get a better view, only to notice that the blade was gleaming, as if it was made from glass. Then, when Yi touched the blade, brilliant light enveloped him. The next time he opened his eyes, there was a thunderous rumble that shook the valley, as the gigantic sword was drawn out from the ground. Yi took a step back, and witnessed 10 giants, each the size of a mountain, standing before him. They wore golden armor and strange helmets, with 2 orbs blazing where their eyes should have been. In the light of the setting sun, they looked like gods descended from the heavens. Further away among the foothills, another 50 giants walked. Yi heard a crowd behind him, but when he turned, he saw a sea of people that felt familiar, but he had never encountered before. Some had feathers all over their backs, some had only 3 fingers, and some had green skin. They were all tall with colorful clothes. Yi had no idea when the crimson-eyed Doran appeared beside him, but when Yi asked who are they, the spirit explained that they were called the Vastaya Shirei, and they were the victors of the battle that took place here. At first, Yi wondered how could they have defeated these titans, but mere moments later, the vision would show him. 10 elders of the Vastaya Shirei army stepped forward. One of them raised her hand into the air and slammed it down onto the ground. The ground shook and deep chasm opened, separating the 2 armies. At the same time, the other 9 elders invoked their magic. Some danced while others just sat down. But together, they summoned an enormous storm and made walls of vines rise from the earth. The spirit then asked Yi, "What do you see now? Is this strength?" Yi nodded, saying, "Yes, this is strength." The spirit added that yet they aren't equipped with armor nor weapons, and they aren't shouting with the fervor of a bloodthirsty army. Where was the strength now? Yi replied that they conjured winds, cold storms, and parted earth itself. If this wasn't strength, what was? As the spirit turned towards the giants, it pointed out that the question wasn't really how they would defeat them. It was how these monsters would deal with the divine power that created this very land. Then the 2 armies clashed. The giants raised their swords up and brought them down at the Vastaya Shirei. It was as if a mountainside was falling upon them. But in return, the Vastaya Shirei did not flinch. They advanced forward, shaping into all kinds of animals. Some charged forward on foot, others took to the skies. In a flash, the Vastaya Shirei turned into a stampede hunting for its prey. Individually, their blows would do nothing to the monsters, but together with the power of the raw elements, they brought some of the giants to their knees and slayed them. Somehow, one of the giants noticed Yi's presence and started marching towards him. Instinctively, Yi took a defensive stance, and the spirit beside him placed a hand on his blade. It explained that winds and rain, thunder and lightning, avalanches, even the body itself, it was all mere forms. If he could find their essence, he could reach all forms, which would also imbue his blade with power. Everything around Yi went to a standstill, as he realized the spirit was talking about Wuju style, the same style of power which the Vastaya Shirei used to change shapes and manipulate elements. The spirit didn't know who founded Wuju, but it admitted it had to be a powerful mage. To Yi, this seemed crazy, because the Wuju were swordsmen, not mages. But once again, the spirit repeated it was all just different forms. In its heart, Wuju was magic. Unfortunately, this didn't help Yi figure out how to wield it. He was good at the martial side, but he still didn't understand why he couldn't draw power from the spirit realm. So, to make it easier, the spirit gave him a helping hand. He took Yi's sword and broke it in half. After all, the blade didn't bear the magic, Yi did. Focusing too much on the swordsmanship and meditation would direct him away from the Wuju instincts. As the giant picked up pace and started sprinting towards Yi, the spirit asked him, how would he defeat an enemy whose strength outmatches his? Yi thought about it quickly and eventually came to the answer, by becoming a river. As the giant sword fell down, Yi instinctively brought up his sheath to block the attack. Everything was but a form, and so, through channeling the primal forces, not only did Yi remain standing and the wooden sheath intact, but it even managed to cut a notch into the giant's weapon. Then the second strike came down, but Yi used the sheath as a weapon, and he dashed against the giant's sword. A blink of an eye later, the giant's sword was cut in half, with the giant's form following it to the ground. As the giant fell, a lightning struck him in the back, and the Vastaya Shirei swarmed over him. The spirit then told Yi that with enough power drawn, he could sunder mountains, a forest, or even the entire world. The thought of this really excited Yi, but the spirit quickly interrupted him by clearing his throat and telling him that this is just a vision. It then added that there was a limit to how much power a human can draw. And so, would Yi really meet an opponent similar to these titans? The spirit suggested he should run. He would probably have a hard time slicing off even its toenail. The spirit then closed his vision by saying that it had seen many Wuju disciples, but somehow Yi stood out. And so, since he grew up in Barl, the spirit was going to teach him something great. Unfortunately, that's when Yi woke up. He was drenched from all the water Doran threw at his face. And understandably, he was angry, because he just missed out on learning something from the spirit. Doran just asked him if he interrupted him slaying the giant, which surprised Yi, and he wanted to know if Doran also lived through this vision. Doran explained that he just heard it from the other bladesmen. It seemed like only the Wuju bladesmen encountered these visions. Then, trying to replicate what happened in the vision, Yi pulled out his dull sword, and after channeling the power of the spirit realm, he cleaved through the giant's blade, a proof to Doran that Yi's training was complete. He also just ruined an ancient artifact for no reason. At the end of this story, with newfound magic coursing through his blade, Yi asked Doran if he could borrow his brush. With the brush in hand, he walked to the now destroyed giant sword, and he wrote words on it, even though they would be washed off by the rain. It wasn't a poem, it was words of gratitude, just like what his master left here years ago. After Doran picked up all the swords and he started walking back, Yi asked him which sword was meant for him. Doran told him none of them. He would give his sword to a junior disciple instead, because it was no longer worthy of Yi. And that was the story of Master Doran. What's cool is that I went into the story hoping that we would get some lore for the items Doran created. But instead, not only did we get some amazing background information for Yi, but we also learned about the Titans of Ionia, which is a piece of history that's been teased in the book and a lot of art ever since. So even though we are not sure where these titans came from, or who made them, we know they were at war with the Vastaya Shirei, which are the most primal beings on Runeterra. Interestingly, after seeing how the Vastaya Shirei army fought united against a great threat, it's really hard for me to connect these badass primal warriors who could call down thunder and rip the earth in half to Nico, because yes, she's one of them.